It's really amazing to me how laws from way back, like from centuries ago, can suddenly become super relevant today.
Yeah, it's kind of wild.
And that's exactly what we're diving into today.
Okay.
The Trump administration tried to deport Venezuelan immigrants, but the courts pushed back hard.
Right, right.
It's a story that highlights the constant tug of war between what the government wants to do and the basic rights people have.
Definitely. Especially when you throw in a law from the 1700s.
Mm-hmm.
Talk about a blast from the past.
Yeah, so to catch everyone up, a federal appeals court just upheld a lower court's ruling that blocked the Trump administration from deporting Venezuelan migrants.
Huge decision.
And get this, the administration tried to use the Alien Enemies Act of 1798 to justify the deportations.
You don't see that every day.
No, not at all. So help us understand this. What's the big deal about using a law that old?
Well, think about it this way. The way we view immigration and individual rights has come a long way since 1798.
I would imagine so.
Courts have generally moved towards stronger protections for non-citizens. So using a law like that, it's definitely raising eyebrows in the legal world.
It's sparking some debate, for sure. So for those who need a refresher, what exactly does this act allow the president to do?
Basically, it gives the president a lot of power over non-citizens who come from countries that are considered hostile, especially during wartime.
Okay.
Or during an invasion.
Got it.
Like, think back to World War II. That was the last time it was actually used.
Wow, really?
Yeah.
So the Trump administration is arguing that this law, a law that's been basically dormant for decades, applies to Venezuelan immigrants.
Exactly. They claim that the Tren de Aragua gang, which is the Venezuelan gang, is basically like an invading force.
So they're comparing a criminal gang to a hostile nation at war.
Yep. It's a bold legal strategy for sure.
Bold is one way to put it. So this invading force claim is what they're hanging their hat on to use this old law.
Exactly. They're trying to say it's like a wartime situation where national security trumps, no pun intended, other concerns like due process.
That's a tough sell, don't you think? I mean, we're not talking about a traditional military invasion here.
Right. And that's where the courts come in.
Mm-hmm.
They're the ones who ultimately decide if this interpretation of the law holds water.
Well, a judge certainly thought it didn't. Tell us about Judge Boasberg.
Right. So U.S. District Judge James Boasberg stepped in and blocked these deportations.
He essentially said, hold on a second. We need to figure out if this is even legal before we start deporting people.
Pretty much. And on top of that, he initially ordered the return of Venezuelan immigrants who had already been deported.
But if I recall correctly, those planes didn't actually turn around, did they?
Nope, they didn't. That part of the story is important too. But anyway, Judge Boasberg effectively hit the pause button on these deportations, and naturally, the administration wasn't happy about that.
So they appealed the decision, hoping to get his order overturned.
Exactly.
Where did that appeal go?
The Justice Department took the case to the U.S. Court of Appeals for the District of Columbia Circuit. And here's the kicker. The appeals court decided to keep Judge Boasberg's block in place.
It wasn't unanimous, though, right?
Right. It was a split decision. 2 judges voted to keep the block, and 1 dissented. Judges Karen L. Kraft Henderson and Patricia Millett were in the majority, and Judge Justin Walker, who was appointed by Trump, dissented.
Ah, so a bit of a political divide on the bench, it seems. And both Henderson and Millett also wrote separate opinions explaining their individual thought processes, right?
Yep. Concurring opinions, they're called. They agreed with the outcome, but maybe had different reasons for getting there.
So let's unpack those, starting with Judge Millett. What were her main points?
Judge Millett, who was nominated by President Obama, by the way, really zeroed in on the fact that this whole legal challenge was still in its early stages. Her big argument was that Boasberg's order was basically just hitting pause, just freezing the situation. It prevented any irreversible action until the courts had a chance to really dig in to the legal issues surrounding the use of the Alien Enemies Act, especially in this specific situation.
So she's saying, hey, let's not jump the gun and deport people based on a law that might not even apply here.
Exactly. She was worried that if the government deported them first, it would basically make the whole lawsuit pointless. The plaintiffs wouldn't even be around to argue their case.
That makes sense.
And, one of the most fundamental principles of our legal system is that everyone deserves their day in court. And Millett also brought up the human cost of these deportations, which is important to remember.
Yeah, it's not just about abstract legal arguments. We're talking about real people's lives.
Absolutely.
So Millett's focus was on fairness and making sure everyone's rights were protected.
Right.
What about Judge Henderson? What was her perspective?
Judge Henderson, who was a George H.W. Bush nominee, came at it a bit differently. She wanted to clarify that the ruling didn't actually stop the government from arresting and detaining migrants under the existing presidential proclamation.
So she's saying detaining them while we figure this out is fine, but deporting them to a potentially dangerous country before any final decision is made, that's a different story.
Exactly. She thought that was a much bigger risk.
And to really drive that point home, she mentioned something the Department of Justice lawyers said during the arguments.
Oh, yeah, they basically admitted that if the injunction was lifted, they'd start deporting people right away, like no waiting around.
Wow. No notice or anything.
Nope.
That's concerning. It sounds like both judges were worried about the lack of due process and the potential for serious harm to these individuals.
For sure. They were both very focused on protecting the rights of the individuals caught in the middle of all of this.
It's good to know someone's looking out for them. Now, before we move on, let's rewind a bit. This whole thing started with a lawsuit filed by the ACLU, right?
Right. Who were they representing?
The American Civil Liberties Union, the ACLU, filed this suit on behalf of 5 Venezuelan non-citizens who were being detained in Texas. These were the people the Trump administration was trying to deport using this wartime law. You know, the ACLU, they often step up to bat when they think someone's basic rights are being violated.
I'd imagine their arguments centered around the same due process concerns the judges raised.
You got it. The Constitution guarantees due process, which means you have the right to be notified if the government's taking action against you, and you have the right to defend yourself in court. The big question in this case was whether those Venezuelan immigrants got those rights before the government decided to deport them.
That's a crucial point. And speaking of due process, Glenn Kirshner brought up a really disturbing story in his YouTube analysis, something about a soccer tattoo. Oh yeah, that story really puts a face on what can happen when due process is ignored. It shows how badly things can go wrong. One of the Venezuelan immigrants said he was tortured back in Venezuela for protesting against the government there. So he comes to the U.S. seeking asylum, hoping for safety, and what happens? He ends up being deported to El Salvador because of a misunderstanding about a tattoo.
Wait, a soccer tattoo gets him deported to a whole other country? How does that even happen?
Well, apparently someone thought the tattoo was a gang symbol. And here's the worst part. They deported him without telling his lawyer or his family. They had no idea where he was going, and they haven't heard from him since.
Wow. That's heartbreaking. It just shows how high the stakes are when the government makes decisions like this without enough information, without giving people a chance to explain themselves.
It's a terrible situation.
Yeah.
And to make matters even worse, the government basically admitted in court that they didn't have all the facts straight.
Huh.
The lawyers from the Justice Department said that the Trump administration didn't have complete information about every single person they were trying to deport using this Alien Enemies Act.
So they were basically saying, we might have gotten some of these people wrong.
Yeah, they couldn't even say for sure how many innocent people, like this guy with the soccer tattoo, might have been wrongly targeted and deported just because of assumptions.
That's pretty scary. It raises some serious doubts about how fair this whole thing was.
Absolutely.
And I read that Judge Boasberg is now looking into whether the administration actually followed his order to stop the deportations.
Oh yeah, that's another piece of the puzzle.
Yeah.
He's trying to find out if they really did try to turn those planes around.
And how's the administration responding to that?
They're playing their cards close to the vest. They invoked state secrets privilege, which means they're saying they can't reveal certain information because it could harm national security.
So we might not get all the answers?
Probably not.
Yeah.
But this is definitely something to keep an eye on.
It is. Okay, so to wrap things up for our listeners, what are the big takeaways from our deep dive into this case?
All right, so first off, the appeals court sided with the lower court and blocked the Trump administration from deporting those Venezuelan immigrants using this really old law, the Alien Enemies Act. This is a big deal because it puts a limit on how the executive branch can use this historical law in today's world, especially when it comes to immigration.
It's a reminder that even the president has to follow the law.
Right. And the court's decision was mainly based on concerns about due process, making sure those immigrants got a fair shake.
Like having a chance to defend themselves before being kicked out of the country.
Exactly.
And the judges were clearly troubled by the fact that the government admitted to not having all the facts straight.
Right. Plus, you can't forget that story about the guy with the soccer tattoo. It shows how easy it is to make a mistake and how devastating the consequences can be when you don't follow due process.
Absolutely.
It's a cautionary tale, for sure.
It really is. This whole case highlights the tension between national security and individual rights. It's a tough balancing act.
Definitely.
And the fact that the government didn't even have all the information before making these deportation decisions is a big concern.
It makes you wonder, how can a government effectively and fairly deal with threats when they don't even have all the facts?
It's a great question.
Right. And what does this all mean for immigration and national security when the information the government's using might be wrong?
It's definitely something to think about.
It is. It's a complex issue with no easy answers.
That's for sure. Well, I think that's about all the time we have for today's deep dive.
Yeah, we covered a lot of ground.
As always, thanks for joining us, and be sure to check back for our next episode where we'll be exploring another fascinating story from the world of law and politics.
Until then, stay informed and stay engaged.